Welcome back to the Sacred Arts Academy, where we talk about all things from the spiritual to the sacred. I am so excited for our discussion today on reclaiming your power with Amparo Vasquez. She is the founder of Azteca and BIPOC CX, which she created to assist marginalized communities navigate our increasingly chaotic times, especially for those most systematically disempowered. Through them, she aims to help create new leaders in the world, those that will not conform themselves to current conditions and norms, but who will unwaveringly challenge all, starting within themselves, and create from a space of wholeness and worthiness and service to humanity. Her vision is one of a world where power rests in the hands of those who lead from their heart and challenge the status quo to its core. Welcome, Amparo.
Thank you so much. It's a pleasure to be here.
Thank you. I am really curious on just getting to know your journey from surviving severe covert abuse to becoming a healer and empowerment advocate. Can you tell us a little bit about how you got here today?
Yeah, absolutely. So, foundation of everything is I've always been very service oriented. That's sort of the core of who I've always been, my personality. It's a part of my culture. It's something that was passed down through stories and through encouragement, right? So that's a foundation. I grew up in South Central LA. I grew up in a area of a lot of hardship inside the home, outside the home. And so I was this little girl who was very service oriented, who wanted to help affect the world, seeing a lot of intense hardship in and out of the home. And from there, I made my way out of that situation, but I found myself in an abusive relationship with the covert narcissist, endured 8.5 years of severe trauma that was so severe, left me with signs of brain damage by the end of it that I didn't know because I was living in survival mode. So I didn't know until after I'd escaped. And someone rescued me. And then I became very aware, forcefully, acutely, of how damaged my mind had become from all of the primarily mental abuse, which I didn't know. I didn't know that you could develop brain damage from mental abuse. And I threw myself into healing because I had no choice. I was very severely traumatized. I was screaming. I was very like unhinged. I felt animalistic. I didn't feel human anymore. I felt very much like a shell of who I was. But all along the way, because I'm very service oriented, all along the way, as I dealt with the harsh reality of having to heal from very severe trauma with very minimal support, because there's very minimal support that's available in the world, at least that I knew of. I was like, this is so unacceptable. This is so unacceptable. We need so much support that's built into just the fabric of society, in order to help people, to make it easier for people to see what they're living, if they're living something like this, to leave it, escape it, to heal from it, and then to emerge as even more whole and even more themselves after healing than what they had experienced before. So, long
Mhm.
story short.
I mean, you obviously have told this story over and over again because you said it so concisely, and yet I can see you living this because I think that this is something that we see a lot in, family members, friends, even in ourselves at certain stages in our lives. I'm really curious about how did you find out, or what were some of the symptoms that came up when on that journey of finding out that you actually had brain damage?
Yeah, so it was very sudden and very forceful. So I was slowly dying through the course of this relationship. I didn't know why I was enduring so much trauma to my body. I misassigned the cause. I thought it was because of the city that I was living in. I thought it was because of financial strife. I thought it was because of aging. But I was dying. Someone saw that I was dying. They set out to rescue me. And then it was like within a week to 2 weeks, I had this very disconcerting experience of laying on the bed and feeling like memories that I didn't know I had access to were bubbling to the surface of my psyche. I have never experienced that before. I
Hmm.
didn't know that I was suppressing memories. I didn't know that I was suppressing emotions, insights. I didn't know. So I had no idea what that sensation feels like. And when I came to in that one moment in time, when I woke up, I had access to memories, I had access to feelings, I had access to insights, like a knowledge that I had been harmed and that I hadn't known that I had been harmed. And so for me, it was really harsh. It wasn't like I was going along my day, and then one day I stumbled upon this book that told me everything. And I was like, I was introduced to certain concepts that let me know that something was awry, and then my own mind unlocked itself. And then for the next, like, it was like an awful 8 weeks where all these repressed memories from my entire life, actually, but primarily during that period of time, the 8.5 years. But for my whole life, they kept rushing out, and it was very overwhelming. I wrote like a fiend every day. There was a lot of psychological pressure, so I was screaming a lot as my mind like rewrote itself, and my understanding of what I had lived my entire life rewrote itself. From what I lived was somewhat harsh, but it was all right, to no, I lived a goddamn nightmare. It was that drastic, the shift that my mind went through. So in having all these repressed memories and repressed insights come to the surface of my psyche, and being so completely broken and not having a lot of support, a lot of recourse to assist me in this, just because it didn't exist. And where it existed, I didn't have access to it. I didn't know that it existed. All I did was just reflect a lot and pour out my thoughts onto paper to help my mind make sense of the reality that I was actively reconstructing, so that then I could research what it is that I was sort of coming across through the pouring out of my own mind. And when I found the term covert narcissism early in that experience, it actually is part of what unlocked everything, because all of a sudden I had a label to apply to what I had lived that made everything made sense. And it was like a freaking domino effect unleashed itself inside of my own mind. And so it was a pouring out of memories and insights that I had no ability to control whatsoever. And then giving myself as much space and time and safety as I could to allow myself to pour that out, and then to heavily research everything. It's so true of so many of us. We come out of this type of experience and then you get a friggin' PhD in the abuse that you lived, because all of a sudden you're researching all this stuff that never made sense to you. But now you have labels, you have other people's stories, you have a way to make sense of what never made sense to you before. So that was my experience.
I am so proud to announce that we are launching another YouTube channel called Third Eye Wide Awake, a podcast about ghosts, cults, and deeper knowledge on spiritual stuff through storytelling. I always find it interesting that when we're looking for the answers, or when we're asking, like, why is this happening, or what is the reason for these things, all of a sudden, like, all of these answers start to come in, and what a burden is lifted once you do have a vernacular to go with your experience. Thank you for sharing that.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, having the right label is so helpful and important. It's also nightmarish, because there is a certain level of like lack of pain almost in not knowing exactly what you lived. So there's a period of mourning. There's a lot of mourning that catches people off guard when you have a way to explain what it is that you lived and
Mhm.
what happened and what caused it. And that's a necessary part of that experience, which sort of brings in the topic of spirituality, because
Mhm.
emotions are sacred. Being in our body is sacred. The experience of being whole and human is sacred. But we've been taught to suppress a lot of this. We've been taught to shame ourselves for a lot of it. We've been taught to just like go forward and martyr yourself and just make do. And that hinders our ability to be able to heal properly. So I had to
Mhm.
sort of come to terms with all of that during that experience.
Yeah. Oh, yeah, absolutely. Speaking of the spiritual stuff, how do you personally balance these two aspects when helping women reclaim their sense of worthiness and joy?
Yeah, I integrate them deeply. So it's like a what is it called? I don't even think about it. I integrate them very naturally together, the spiritual and the practical, because they are very, very deeply intertwined for me. They're not disconnected. They're deeply interconnected. And so for me, the concept of like worthiness and self-care is deeply tied to the idea of global activism is deeply tied to the concept of healing from something as horrendous as mental abuse that rewrites you from the inside out. These topics are all deeply interconnected. The individual is deeply connected to the systemic and to the collective. It's all very deeply connected. And so one of the things that I do is I am a translator. I'm Mexican American. My whole life I've been a bridge builder, right? Between cultures, between peoples, between socioeconomic circles. And so I have taken on a natural proclivity to translating concepts for different audiences so that they can best digest them. So I'll translate like spiritual concepts like the law of attraction, for example, to an audience that doesn't necessarily know that concept in a way that makes sense to them because I use logic that they do have access to in order to understand, oh, yeah, okay, my beliefs do have a very practical, very, very visible impact on the results of my life by X, Y, and Z. And that's affected by this factor and this factor and this factor. And this is how it affected. This is how to change it. And this is the huge practical impact that it has. So very deeply intertwined.
That's beautiful. As a highly educated spiritual woman of color who, basically grew up in LA, how has your diverse background influenced your approach to healing and empowerment?
It is my approach to healing and empowerment. Everything that is me, every sliver of my identity has made its way into my approach to understanding the world and to communicating it and to helping people heal within it as well. So, highly educated, I'm super research focused. I understand the ins and outs of the entire world that connects to a concept fairly quickly because I'm used to it. I'm used to like deeply studying the ins and outs of concepts. So like throw me into the middle of the pool. I will learn how to swim. This is who I am. It's who I've been for almost my whole life. And it was a survival thing back in the day of like that was how to get out of the hood. That was how to bring peace to home. It was about survival. It wasn't about like, oh, let me just like get an A because it's fun. No, it was like my survival depended on that A,
Hmm.
right? So that's where the highly educated piece comes from. Spiritual, again, it's all deeply intertwined. So liberation and healing cannot come without self-reclamation, without self-care, without understanding the ways that we've been socialized to harm ourselves, to hate ourselves, to belittle ourselves, and how that benefits certain people in our proximity and in society at large, and why that should light a fire under our asses to love the shit out of ourselves. Excuse my language. But that's where the spiritual piece comes in and how everything is all deeply interconnected and tracing back to our my ancestry, and then woman of color. So I grew up in the hood. I've lived through periods of time of witnessing and experiencing a lot of very systemic oppression. And so it makes me be very aware of things that I wouldn't know if I had grown up in privilege or if I had grown up outside of communities of color. There's a lot that I wouldn't know about the collective experience of so many people across society, right?
Hmm.
So, first of all, that gives me a wide view lens of a lot of things in the world. It makes me deeply appreciative of humanity and of so many things within the world. And it makes me very passionate about protecting people. It makes me really passionate about educating people. It makes me really passionate about validating people and helping them to see the beauty within themselves. Because those of us who are most marginalized within the world are often the ones who are most receiving the messages to hate the self, to martyr the self, to diminish the self. And there's so much beauty. There's so much beauty and power. And I cannot emphasize that enough. There's so much beauty and power in the individual human. And the more that we can connect to that and help each other see that within ourselves and witness that within each other, the more that a huge domino effect kicks off in the entire world around us is huge. The power of one person who understands how beautiful they are, how worthy they are, how powerful they are, has a huge impact on the world around them. And that's just one person. So,
Mm.
yeah.
You said a couple of things there that really struck a chord with me. The first one being, you said something that every time I've said it, I just get blank stares and like confusion, and nobody has ever really identified So I feel so seen right now. The thing that you said was like that A was my survival. And because people would always criticize me for why I was an overachiever, why I needed to take on so many things. But taking on those so many things meant I wasn't in the house. It meant I was avoiding my emotional abuser. It meant I didn't feel safe in my house. Getting that A meant it was a ticket into a scholarship out of the house, and it was the way that I was going to be able to survive. So that was number one. So thank you for that. And then number two, being mestiza, basically. I'm very mestiza. It
Mm.
does allow you for a different view. And coming from poverty, I'm also from LA, by the way. um, Coming from poverty and coming from parents that immigrated and things like that, because I've been in like holistic healing spaces where it's a white woman with green eyes and talking about a lot of our healing modalities from South America, Central America, it just falls short because they don't have that point of view. And so you said
Yeah.
it in a different way, but I'm just regurgitating it like from my point of view. And
Yeah.
then the third one is there is something so deep about that word beauty, especially on my path, because for me, walking in beauty means walking in alignment and walking in right way. And walking
Mm.
in right way means that you're true and authentic to yourself. And it means that you have boundaries and you are sovereign and you are taking care of yourself and
Yes.
you know who you are so deeply that nothing else is going to make you waver.
Yes. And it connects to your connection to Earth. There's
Yeah.
something so profound and important that has been, in my estimation, intentionally lost over time of our connection to Earth. And where does that theory come from? From a few different things, including we see it within stories of colonialism all over the world, right? A native culture that's very deeply connected to the Earth, and then a colonial power comes in and rips away that relationship. Why? Why? That question is so important. That why? What gets lost when our connection to the Earth and our understanding of how beautiful and powerful and magnanimous and abundant and safe our connection is with the earth and how it can feed those feelings within us, what gets lost when that gets dimmed? And the reverse question is also equally important, right? What do you gain when all it takes for you to feel good and safe and aware of how worthy you are is to step outside and look at the sky? It's to go outside and touch a tree. It's to witness the birds. It's to feel the sun. What do you gain? A lot. A
Yeah.
lot.
I think the answer is the same for both. Like the first thing that came up is power, right?
Mhm.
Like you're giving your power away. And then at the same time, when you're centered and connected, you're reclaiming your power.
Bless you.
I got
And
choked up a little bit.
and to that, I want to add true power. Because something else has happened over time, over a long time, is the world redefined the concept of power in a way that made humans manipulatable. Because if you define power as like power over or as something that is something that can be easily taken away from you, or power as something that you have to play by these rules of carrots and sticks in order to acquire more of it, you're manipulatable.
Hmm.
Versus what power actually is. Power is knowing yourself.
Hmm.
Power is being able to bring yourself back into your body. Power is being a rock in the middle of a raging ocean and not being touched by it. That's power. Power is being able to influence people all around you, hopefully in the positive, simply by existing. That's power. So the way that the world has redefined a lot of concepts, power, love, even cooperation, like the way that it's redefined a lot of terms suits the purpose of making people forget about themselves, lose themselves, chase after external validation, and become easily to manipulate in the process, which then has this other domino effect, this other consequence of then that individual person stops being able to trust their intuition, stops being such a critical thinker, becomes a much easier victim to individual abusers, like what I ended up living through. I had been gaslit by my religion, by my culture, by my society. When you gaslight a person, there's a there's an immediate effect. But that's especially true if that person endures layers of gaslighting. And that's especially true if they experience layers of gaslighting from multiple entities. That's all of us. And that's been all of us for generations. And with every generation, there is always a small subset of us who sees through it, right? But the vast majority of us, that's been our story. And that's been our ancestors' story for the vast majority of us. And so it's another really important question to ask is what is the impact of generations of multi-layered global gaslighting? And how do we take it back? And the answer stems back to the individual. The answer stems back to you start to challenge things. You start to ask why. Just ask why. Literally, all you have to do is ask why. Ask it over and over and over again and notice people's responses to you asking that question. Because if you're in an unsafe environment, the question why is a threat.
Mm-hmm.
And that's how you know. But if you keep asking that question, you're going to arrive to some really powerful ahas and conclusions that were lost in time that we can always reclaim again.
That's beautiful. Thank you for sharing that. Why is such a powerful question because you can ask that multiple times and get deeper and deeper into the root.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah. How does your work with Azteca help women confront socialized beliefs that keep them small, silent, and second guessing themselves?
So everything that we're talking about is part of the foundation of my work with Azteca. I have a flagship group program that I called I Am Worthy. That's the name of the group program, I Am Worthy. I named it that because I wanted to offer my participants like every opportunity to say something positive about themselves. So I'm like, well, I might as well name this program something that allows them to say something positive about themselves, right? So this program allows me to put all this all together. It's my medicine. It was my opportunity to turn all of everything that I've lived as a highly educated spiritual woman of color who is also a covert abuse survivor, who has studied international relations, who has studied like patterns across history, to be able to turn it into something that's going to help people, A, understand the impact of things like gaslighting at the individual level and systemic level, to receive a lot of validation over how so many different factors in their relationships, their friendships, their families, their cultures, their schools, their medical offices, their workplaces, their government offices, all affect them in very predictable ways, which releases shame and guilt. Because a lot of us, we walk around like, oh God, why don't I feel good? I'm so mean to myself. Being mean to yourself about being mean to yourself, right? And if you can actually understand the cause, you start to release some of that shame and guilt. And I reiterate that a lot. And so we go through that process and then we talk about, okay, so this is the impact. And part of the impact was you are living in survival mode. You're wearing a mask perpetually all the time to survive. Easiest example is when we enter into a workplace, the average workplace, we're not allowed to be our full selves. Our full selves will get fired, right? So you have to wear a mask in the average workplace. That is normalized systemic emotional violence. That's what that is. That is akin to native cultures having to assimilate into societies in order to survive. We are having to assimilate into the average workplace where we spend 50% of our lives, not even waking lives, 50% of our lives in order to survive. Because if we don't do this, we won't have a source of income and we'll be homeless and die, right? So it is the modern day version of that. But with every generation, the current form of systemic violence gets normalized. That's how harm works. At the individual and the systemic level, harm gets normalized. That's why people don't understand how much they're enduring because it's normalized. So I help them to understand the impact And then the question becomes, okay, if I'm wearing a mask and I'm always in survival mode, who actually am I? So
Mm-hmm.
we walk through how to reclaim who they really are, which includes joy, worthiness, badassery, these parts of themselves that have been dimmed or rejected over time in order to survive or as a result of what they've lived. And then I help them to be able to go through the process of thinking through, like, how do you get that back? How do you heal? How do you create a new life on this foundation of understanding who you actually are? How do you break patterns across your life and across time? Patterns that have been passed down generation after generation through your ancestral line, because that's how it works. That's how it works, right?
Mm-hmm.
There's a lot of us of our generation who talk about how we're the breakers, we're the curse breakers, we're the generational curse breakers. That's why, because pain gets passed down until someone gets to start asking those questions of why. And they have the fortitude and they have the resources and they have the support and they have the knowledge and they have the internal resources in order to be able to challenge them and confront them. But I
Mm-hmm.
just want to note, by that same token, it's not just pain that gets passed down. It's love, it's power, it's resiliency, it's all sorts of good stuff that supports us in being able to deal with the pain and change it and transform it.
That's a really good call out. Now, being with a covert narcissist, it's um, unsurmountable, right? And I know that you have overcome some severe CPTSD and other traumas related symptoms. What were some of the key strategies or the practices that aided your healing process?
Yeah, it was very much dependent on what I was able to handle at the time. I employed so many strategies. At the very beginning, like I mentioned, I was just pouring myself out into journals and taking 3 hour long walks, 4 hour long walks, 5 hour long walks every day to process because that's all that I could do. Then it was seeking support. Then it was trying to remember who I used to be because I didn't remember anymore. I didn't have an identity. I was a shell of who I was. So I had had the benefit that not everybody does of having had a period of time in between periods of abuse. So even though mm, I was always like a people pleaser who allowed people to step all over her, and so I was always enduring abuse to one degree or another, I had a period of about 7 years when I was out of my home to away from childhood abusers, and I hadn't been ensnared yet as an adult. And so I had 7 years where I got to experience who I really was, more of who I really was. So she saved me. So I went back to pictures of her. I picked up memorabilia from that time. I listened to a ton of songs. Music was so instrumental. Music, oh my God, music. Music, okay. The way that memory creation works is memories get stored even more strongly when they're attached to an emotion. Songs usually cause us to emote strong emotions, right? That's why you can listen to a song and all of a sudden you're back there again. You're 5 years ago, you're 10 years ago, you're 15 years ago. Use that to your advantage. So when you're trying to remember what it felt like to feel like a hopeful 15-year-old or a really strong 22-year-old, listen to the songs that you listened to at that time if you listened to songs that elicited those emotions at that time. So I used music, I used breath work. Breath work was something that I had found prior to escaping that trained me, taught me to know when trauma was right at the surface, like it was ready to be released. And I was a suppressor. Suppression is how I survived, right? So this was a crucial skill to have because as it was, even with that skill set of being able to feel right when trauma was on the surface, I was still cracking and breaking and screaming because all the suppression was causing me to feel like a constant pressure cooker of like I was completely unaware of pressure building within me until I was ready to explode and feel like I was going to lose my mind. But having had the experience of developing the skill set of, and there's a certain word for it, there's a sense-oriented word for it that I don't remember, but like being able to feel within and have a higher level of self-awareness than maybe the average person around the building up of stuff was really important. And that built up even more over time as I dealt with my suppressive tactics, as I taught my subconscious and my nervous system that I was safe to feel. that I was safe to feel again. And so I didn't have to suppress. I didn't have to suppress so much. And over time, this, excuse me, the suppression dimmed and my self-awareness came up and up and up. And so another tactic that I use, another technique, it's so simple, but it was the most effective and it's the most important thing that anyone can ever do ever. Bringing myself back into my body over and over and over and over and over again. This is me pulling something completely out of my ass, but I'm pretty sure it's close to the truth. My guess is the vast majority of humanity is in a constant state of disassociation to one degree or another because we're just trying to survive. And that is one of the go-to easy ways to survive. So when people are watching TV, my guess is they're actually numbing themselves and disassociating. So the solution, the medicine to this is to gradually bring yourself back into your body, back into your body, back into your body, and telling yourself, training yourself, helping yourself to know and feel and experience safety in doing that. And what do I mean by that? It's bringing your attention and your focus into your breathing, into your chest, into your heart rate, into your mind, sort of inside of yourself. So often our minds are out there, right? We're sort of focused on what's going on outside of us and our future and our past. It's bringing your mind back into this present moment of what is right in front of me right now. What are these colors? What are these textures? What does it feel like to touch my own skin? So bringing yourself back into the present moment, back into your body. And adjacent to that, again, another really important thing, a lot of self-soothing, self-kindness. And that has to be relearned. That has to be relearned. Children aren't born, babies aren't born hating themselves, but we get socialized over time. And that's especially true if you endure something like abuse, right? You learn to be really mean to yourself, not just in how you think about yourself, but how you treat yourself, how you respond to yourself. And that's especially true when you're not doing well. When you're not doing well is when you're treated the worst. So you learn to treat yourself the worst when you're not doing well. So again, literally, it's putting your hand on your heart, skin to skin contact, and just letting your hand rest there as your chest rises and falls, and your heart beats. And just keep your attention there and give yourself a hug. Literally give yourself a hug. A lot of us feel silly doing this because we've been shamed to not do this stuff. That's a clue. The stuff that we're shamed about is a clue to what we need to heal. It's a clue. It's the most direct clue. What have you been shamed about? That's probably what you need to do to heal.
Yeah, I think what you said is pretty accurate. Most people live in their heads, and it's usually the past or the future, which is anxiety and depression. And I
Yeah.
think that some of these, modalities is so important, like not just regulating your nervous system, but really being in your body. And I like what you said, like presence really is the medicine. It's so funny
Yes.
because I just did a book club like an hour or two ago, and that was like the main takeaway there. Like being in your body is so important, and it's uncomfortable because we're so used to living in the future and living in the past, or living in the
Yes.
past, and being fully present just feels scary and probably dysregulated.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's instinctive to run away from that which feels
Mhm.
scary, right?
Yeah.
And that instinct is great sometimes. But when it comes to sort of confronting the things that are inside of us that bring up fear, that actually may work against us. And I hesitate around saying that because I never wanted to say something that again feels like judgmental or shaming. People are always doing the best that they can, right? But here's something else that's also what I believe to be true. I think people are a lot stronger than they realize. A lot stronger than they realize. And you can't know how strong you are unless you confront something that you didn't know that you could. And so one of the benefits of my having been thrown into the deep end of this experience and not having had a chance or a choice in having to heal from such horrendous crap is I know how strong I am now because these were all the things that I was running away from before, which is why in part I ended up in what I ended up in was because this was too scary to see or view or experience within me. But then I went through it because I had no choice I will never want to go through that again. I don't want others to go through that because it was horrendous. But in doing it, no one can tell me that I'm not strong. No
Mhm.
one can.
That's right. You'd mentioned healing fast and thoroughly from hardships. What advice would you give to others who are just beginning their healing journey about after abuse or trauma?
Say that last part again.
What advice would you give to others who are just beginning their healing journey after abuse or trauma?
Yeah. So one is the process is gradual. We're so trained and so two things. We're trained to expect fast results. You also want fast results when you're starting the process of healing, because when you get to the point where you're just like, screw this, I want to heal. You've endured a lot of stuff. You were putting up with a lot of stuff. You've been run down to the ground by the time you get there. So you feel a sense of urgency of like, I need air now. I've been underwater for an hour. I need air now, right? So it makes sense that once you start the healing process, you want fast results. But here's the thing, fast results are often sort of flimsy or contrary to long-term healing, or in being in that space of wanting fast results, you can unfortunately end up in the hands of a cult leader, for example. There are a lot of cults that are based in some form of spirituality, and they target people who are in the early throes of their healing process, who are vulnerable, who are seeking fast results. So it is to your deep benefit to protect yourself like no one ever has. And part of that protection is being patient with yourself, kind with yourself, and being okay with a gradual process, which is natural and normal. Knowing that if you keep going, that's all you have to do. Keep going in working to learn how to bring yourself back into your body. Keep going in learning how to be a little bit kinder to yourself, a little bit kinder, a little bit kinder, a little bit more compassionate. Keep going and working to understand what you've lived and the impact of it. Education, understanding what we've lived, that unlocks so many doors within us. Keep going, knowing that it's a gradual process and that every step of the way will be worth it. And you will note progress. And maybe the progress won't be as fast as you want it to be at the outset. But when you keep going, at some point, you will have the wherewithal to be able to thank yourself, thank your past self for having gone that route and protected yourself along the way.
Mm, beautiful. So, can you tell us a little bit about what you're working on? How can people connect with you? How can they participate in your programs?
Yeah, absolutely. So I'm wrapping up. I'm so excited. So I Am Worthy, my group program. I just launched the first round of it this year. We're in month 3 of 4 months. It's a 4-month program. Really great results. It's been such a pleasure to get to work with my participants within my first group program, the first round of it. We're seeing very significant progress in them being able to love themselves, like not even again, to love themselves and to understand how they've been groomed in all the ways that we're talking about. So I'm really excited about that. And we're rounding out the corner. We have one more month. I'm going to relaunch it in September, I'm aiming at. And so that's what's coming up is the relaunch of that program. I'm going to get their feedback. I'm going to make some tweaks to the program. I'm always looking to evolve and improve and everything else. And then I'm going to relaunch it and I'm going to open it up to a wider audience. So that's what's coming around the corner. There's other things that I'm working on. I have 2 workbooks that I just created in Spanish and in English. Reclaim Your Worthiness and Reclaim Your Self-Love. They're ritual-based exercises in combination with a journal and journal exercises to help people to reclaim their worthiness or to reclaim their feeling of self-love. And so I have other ideas like that in the pipeline. There's just a lot of good stuff. In terms of how someone can connect with me and find me, they can go to my website, azteca.com, ASTEKAH.com. I'm on Instagram at Azteca underscore. If people want, I don't think I mentioned this to you previously, but if people want, they can access a free meditation as well that's on my website. So it's azteca.com. I believe it's slash podcast slash gift if they want to get that as well. So that's all.
Amazing. Thank you so much.
Yeah.
And thank you for coming on and sharing your wisdom and sharing your story. I know that a lot of us can relate with it. And I will link all of that down below. And for our listeners, if you enjoyed this conversation, let us know what you thought in the comments, like, and subscribe.
Thank you.